Welcome back, everyone, to the Elder Confessions channel. I am from Saigon and have been a son-in-law in the north for 12 years. The day my father was hospitalized, I asked to visit him. My mother-in-law tossed a tattered bag at me. "Get out, and don't you dare show your face here again." When I arrived and opened the bag, I was deeply shocked. My name is Pham Quoc Hoi, born and raised in a small alley in Saigon. My family wasn't well off, living in a simple house tucked between rows of metal roofs. In the summer, it was scorching. In the rainy season, you could hear every drop hitting the roof. My mother passed away when I had just turned 20. From then on, my father, Mr. Pham Van Nhan, acted as both parents, quietly raising me on his electrician's wages. My father wasn't someone who could express affection with words. His whole life, he only knew pliers and screwdrivers, climbing hot roofs to fix electrical wiring for others. His hands were always calloused, with old burn scars on his fingertips. But those very hands provided every meal, every set of clothes, and all my years of schooling. My father often told me that because we were poor, I needed a decent trade. Because money can be lost and people can turn their backs, but a skill is something no one can steal. Following his advice, I studied refrigeration at a vocational college. After graduating, I got a job as a technician for a company specializing in installing and maintaining cold storage, dryers, and food packaging lines. The work was very grueling. There were days I had to crawl into scorching machine compartments, drenched in sweat, my hands covered in grease. But I loved the feeling of finding the exact cause of a problem, fixing a machine that seemed ready for the scrap heap and seeing it run again. I am not a smooth talker, nor do I know how to butter up superiors or clients. I only have one rule: fix exactly what is broken and nothing else. I hate technicians who take advantage of people who don't know technology to unnecessarily replace parts and overcharge them. Once, a client was told they needed to replace an entire compressor unit worth hundreds of millions of dong. After a thorough inspection, I discovered the cause was just a sensor wired incorrectly. Once it was fixed, they thanked me profusely, but my manager blamed me for not knowing how to generate revenue. I just smiled. Money earned by causing others losses will sooner or later have to be paid back one way or another. In late 2011, my company sent me to a Midland province in the north to handle the cold storage system for an agricultural procurement facility named Ton Ton. At first, I only thought this would be a business trip lasting about 3 months. I did not expect that trip to open up an entirely different chapter of my life, keeping me in the north for the next 12 years. The Ton Ton facility was built by Mr. Du Ton Ton from a small roadside collection point. His family specializes in buying vegetables from farmers, processing, packaging, and shipping them to wholesale markets and retail chains in many provinces. During the early years of favorable business, Mr. Ton invested in additional cold storage to preserve his goods. However, the new system had not been in use for long before it started encountering constant issues. Temperatures between the storage units varied wildly, power consumption spiked abnormally, and many batches of produce rotted shortly after arrival. On my first day in the storage area, just looking at the layout of the pipes and electrical panels, I felt something was wrong. The compressors were patched together, the high-load power cables were substandard, and the temperature sensors were mounted right by the doors, so the readings didn't reflect the internal temperatures. Some connections were wrapped temporarily with electrical tape. One look made it obvious that the previous installer just wanted to get the job over with. The person previously in charge insisted the entire system had degraded and wanted to replace almost everything at a cost of over 2 billion Vietnamese dongs. When Mr. Ton heard that figure, his face grew heavy. The facility had just taken out loans to expand. If they continued to sink a large sum into it without fixing the issue, the risk of closure was very real. I asked him for 3 weeks to inspect and handle each area. I told him straight that most of the equipment did not need to be replaced. The problem lay in the improper installation and incorrect maintenance. Mrs. Hoang T. Van, Mr. Ton's wife, who was sitting next to him, immediately looked me up and down. Her eyes showed a hint of disdain when she saw me wearing only a worn-out protective suit. She said coldly, "You came from the south, talk is easy, but if you ruin a warehouse, even selling your house won't cover the damages." I didn't argue. I only requested that all replacement parts be clearly labeled with codes, sealed, and verified one by one. If I suggested the wrong parts, the company could refuse to pay for them. Hearing that, Mr. Ton nodded and let me give it a try. During those 3 weeks, I practically lived and slept at the warehouse. By day, I inspected the system. At night, I monitored the temperature of each cold room. I replaced undersized wiring, relocated sensors, fixed refrigerant leaks, and calibrated the compressors. Some nights, nearing 2 a.m., I was still sitting on my toolbox recording every figure in my notebook. The person who regularly brought me coffee was do knock Mai, Mr. and Mrs. Tone's eldest daughter. Mai was 26 at the time, having just returned from studying supply chain management to help the family. Unlike her mother, she didn't rush to doubt or look down on me. She sat and listened to me explain why electricity consumption rose, why you couldn't just look at screen numbers for a cold room, and why you had to check airflow and cargo placement. After 18 days, the system began to run stably. Electricity consumption dropped by nearly a third. A batch of carrots showing signs of spoilage was moved to the right cold room and saved just before it had to be discarded. Mr. Tone came down to the warehouse, gripped my hand, and said I hadn't just fixed machines, I had saved his entire family's hard-earned money. Mrs. Van didn't offer praise, but from that day on, she no longer looked at me with such total disdain, and Mai appeared at the warehouse more and more often. Sometimes she brought me a hot cup of coffee, other times she sat with me counting inventory until late. The feelings between us didn't begin with flowery words. They grew from hurriedly eaten meals, cold nights standing by the warehouse door, and the times she quietly waited for me to lock the engine room before heading home. The 3-month assignment passed faster than I expected. The cold storage system at the Tonton facility was now running smoothly. The number of damaged shipments dropped significantly, and the local technical team also started getting used to the new maintenance procedures. According to the original plan, I just needed to hand over all the documents, provide a few more days of guidance, and then return to Saigon. I had already booked my flight ticket, and my belongings were almost fully packed. However, the day before I was set to leave, Mr. Tone called me into his office. Without beating around the bush, he said plainly that the facility was preparing to expand with a new processing area and a new storage warehouse. There are many people here who know how to operate the machinery, but he hasn't found anyone who understands the technical side and is as diligent in following every step as I am. He proposed that I quit my job at my old company and stay on to oversee the entire refrigeration system, dryers, and packaging lines for his family. The salary he offered was significantly higher than my income at that time. He also promised to let me build my own technical team, provide housing, and offer performance bonuses if the system helped the facility save costs. For someone in my profession, it was a great opportunity. But I couldn't nod immediately because my father was still in Saigon, living alone in our small house. Since my mother passed away, it has just been the two of us. Although his health wasn't alarming at the time, he had started suffering from high blood pressure and occasionally had trouble breathing when doing heavy work. I understood that if I stayed in the north, I wouldn't be able to be by his side immediately whenever he got sick. A distance of over 1,000 kilometers is not something you can just cover whenever you want. That evening, I called and told my father everything. He was silent for a long time before asking me if I really wanted to stay. I didn't hide the fact that, beyond work, I also had feelings for Nok Mai. After hearing that, Dad just let out a soft sigh. He told me I was grown up and should choose my own path. But remember one thing. Don't forget who you are just because you're in love. That sentence stayed with me for a very long time. Dad didn't stop me, nor did he use his old age to hold me back. Because of that, I found it even harder to make a decision. I wanted to seize the opportunity in front of me, but I was afraid that one day, if I couldn't make it back in time, I would regret it. Mai knew I was preparing to leave, but she didn't try to hold me back with sentimental words. On the last night before the handover, she came down to the warehouse and sat with me on the steps outside the machine room. The weather in the north at the end of the year was biting cold. The wind swept through the workshop, carrying the scent of produce and damp earth. Mai said she didn't want to use the family business to keep me here, but she also didn't want to pretend that my leaving wouldn't affect her. I asked her if our feelings were enough to overcome the distance of family, region, and our future life together. Mai didn't make any grand promises. She only said that if I stayed, she would find a way with me. But if I decided to return to Saigon, she would respect that. However, we probably wouldn't have any other chance. Our relationship couldn't be kept hidden for long. Mrs. Van was the one who opposed it the most. In her eyes, I was just a worker from the south, with no house, land, or relatives to back me up here. My father lived alone and was starting to get sick, so she thought if her daughter married me, she wouldn't just have to care for her husband, but also take on the burden of a father-in-law far away. One afternoon, she called me into the main house and told me directly in front of Mr. Tone and Mai that her family was not short of workers. She told me not to think that just because I could fix a few machines, I had a place in this family. The words weren't loud, but every syllable carried clear contempt. I didn't lose my temper. I just said that I had never used my trade to bargain for marriage. If Mai didn't choose me, I could still go back to Saigon to work, support myself, and take care of my father with my own hands. I don't need to rely on anyone's fortune to survive. Mr. Tone heard this and immediately spoke up to defend me. He scolded his wife for speaking so harshly to someone who was working honestly for the family. Mai also insisted that she didn't need a husband who was already wealthy, but someone responsible, hardworking, and capable of standing tall on his own merits. The firmness of the father and daughter forced Mrs. Van to back down, but I knew she was only accepting it on the surface. After many days of thought, I decided to return my flight ticket and agreed to stay for 1 year. I set a clear limit for myself. If my job stabilized, I would rent my own place. I had to arrange to visit my dad a few times a year and not let my new life make me forget where I was born. At the end of 2012, Mai and I held our wedding. The wedding took place in her hometown, not too extravagant but full of relatives and family business partners. My dad flew out from Saigon alone, carrying the old toolbox my mother had kept for me and a pair of rings he had scrimped and saved to buy. On the wedding day, Mrs. Van greeted the guests very warmly. However, when introducing me to some acquaintances, she still referred to me as the technician who works for the family, as if my role as a son-in-law was a minor detail not worth mentioning. I heard it, but I didn't want to spoil the mood on such an important day. Before returning to Saigon, my dad pulled me into a quiet corner. He looked toward the large house of my wife's family and slowly said, "Living with your in-laws is nothing to be ashamed of. It's only scary when you do so much that people think it's your obligation." I nodded, but back then I didn't fully understand his words. After the wedding, my wife and I moved into a small house behind the workshop, on Mr. and Mrs. Tone's land. I knew the house didn't belong to me, but I still believed that as long as we worked hard together and lived decently, the name on the papers wasn't the most important thing. At that time, I thought I had just found a new home in the north. I didn't know that the decision to stay for 1 year would stretch on for 12 years. And it was from that small house behind the workshop that I began a life where the line between family and employee became increasingly blurred. After the wedding, I officially quit my old job and signed a contract to be the head of the technical department for the Ton facility. My work was no longer just fixing the cold storage when it broke down, but included the entire industrial electrical system, dryers, packaging lines, and periodic equipment maintenance. I had a monthly salary and performance bonuses, but no shares, no assets in my name, and no say in the facility's financial decisions. At the time, I didn't think it was all that important. Mr. Tone treated me quite kindly, and Mai often said that since her parents only had 2 children, the business would eventually be left to us. I heard that and believed her, because I never had any intention of marrying her just to eye my in-laws' assets. All I wanted was a stable job, a happy family, and the opportunity to use my skills to build a future. After a few months of direct operations, I realized the facility's biggest problem wasn't the machinery, but the reliance on word-of-mouth experience. The longtime workers remembered which machines broke down where and would just fix them themselves. Newcomers would just stand by, watch, and try to learn. There was no clear maintenance schedule. Nobody recorded machine operating hours, replaced parts, or the causes of incidents. Whenever goods were damaged, people usually blamed the weather, power outages, or old equipment. But when I checked closely, much of the damage could have been avoided if someone monitored the temperature, cleaned the cooling units on time, and checked the electrical load before peak season. I began creating individual logs for each device, labeling every machine, and recording maintenance dates, operating parameters, and the person in charge of each shift. At first, many found this tedious. Some said that since the facility only had a few warehouses, it didn't need to be managed like a big company. Mr. Nguyen Duc Sao, a longtime warehouse manager, also looked at the charts I hung on the wall and laughed, saying that you only need to hear a machine to know what's wrong, and notes can't replace experience. I didn't argue, I just asked everyone to try it for 3 months. I said the seniors' experience is valuable, but if it isn't recorded, newcomers will have to pay the price in spoiled goods to learn it. Mr. Sao didn't say anything more, but from the next day on, he quietly helped me record the machine logs and reminded workers to sign off after every shift. I also proposed installing temperature sensors with alerts connected to our phones. At that time, this system wasn't common in mid-sized facilities, so Ms. Van thought I was just finding ways to spend money. I had to calculate the cost specifically, proving that preventing just one spoiled shipment would cover the investment. Finally, Mr. Tone agreed to let me try it out in one warehouse. Less than 2 months later, the system proved its effectiveness. One night, that area suffered a localized power outage due to an overloaded connection. Previously, it wouldn't have been discovered until workers arrived in the morning, by which time all the produce inside might have spoiled. Thanks to the alert sent to my phone, Mr. Sao and I arrived in time to switch to the generator and save a shipment worth nearly 600 million Vietnamese dongs. After that incident, even those who had previously opposed it began following the procedures. I continued to renovate the old drying area, utilizing waste heat to preheat the air instead of letting it escape. The solution wasn't too complex, mainly requiring a recalculation of airflow and adjustments to some components, but it helped significantly reduce monthly fuel costs. Mr. Tone wanted to reward me many times. During the meal, he said that the stable operation of the technical side was thanks to me, so from the next season, he wanted to set aside a portion of the profits to share based on performance. Before I could even answer, Mrs. Van brushed it off. She said wages must be wages, family money must be family money, and it wouldn't do to blur lines of ownership just because her son-in-law did a good job. She often told employees that I was family, and doing a little extra work wouldn't go to waste anyway. The statement sounded affectionate at first, but the more I heard it, the more I felt my efforts were viewed as a duty that required no accounting. The times I stayed until 2 or 3 a.m., the days off I rushed to the warehouse because of abnormal temperatures. Gradually, no one asked me if I was tired anymore. Mr. Sao once pulled me aside, advising me that matters of money and rights must be clearly written on paper. He said that outsiders who perform well know how to demand their due, while family members are often held back by the concept of sentiment. I just smiled and thought he was overthinking it. I trusted Mr. Tone, and thought that since I was the son-in-law, I shouldn't constantly bring up what I was entitled to. In 2014, Mai gave birth to our first daughter. The moment I held my tiny baby in my arms, I felt all the sleepless nights and exhaustion just fade away. We named her Du Pham Ha Mai. Actually, I wanted her to have my surname Pham, but Mrs. Van insisted that Du must come first to uphold their family tradition. She said there were only 2 children in their family, and since Mai was the eldest daughter, the child had to be linked to her side of the family. I didn't want my wife to feel conflicted right after giving birth, so I agreed. When I called to tell my father, he was silent for a few seconds, then just said any name was fine, as long as the child was healthy and grew up well. He spoke gently, but I could still sense a hint of heartache in his voice. In those first few years of parenthood, our life as a couple was still very warm. Mai used to bring meals to the workshop herself, waiting for me to finish fixing the machines so we could walk home together to the small house behind the warehouse. There were nights when the baby cried all night, yet I still had to go down and check the systems the next morning. Caring for me, Mai would take a moment to prepare a pot of hot tea and leave it in the technical room. She never once minded the smell of grease and oil on my clothes. Once, as soon as I pulled into the yard, little Mai heard the motorbike and began kicking in her mother's arms. Mai stood at the door, laughing and saying our daughter recognized her father even faster than her mother's voice. Those moments made me believe more than ever that I was living the right life. I thought that any omissions regarding paperwork, ownership rights, or long-term benefits could be overlooked, because the most important thing was for a couple to be of one mind and for the family to cherish one another. I didn't realize that while I saw the facility as our shared legacy to pour my heart into, Mrs. Van only ever saw me as a skilled worker. I was fortunate that her family provided me with a job and a place to live. The better I performed, the more responsibilities I was assigned. But what belonged to me was never once documented in any clear terms on paper. Starting in 2016, the facility entered a new phase of development. The small warehouses from before were expanded into 2 separate storage areas, a closed processing zone, and an automated packaging line. Mr. Tone went through the procedures to turn our family business into a limited liability company, hired more management staff, and signed more long-term supply contracts than before. Nak Mai was appointed Deputy Director of Sales. She no longer just sits checking orders like the early years, but frequently meets with partners, attends industry conferences, and hosts delegations visiting our factory. Mai has always been quick-witted and well-educated, so she adapted very fast. The way she dresses, speaks, and carries herself has also changed to fit her new environment. I am happy for her. Seeing Mai stand in the meeting room, confidently presenting the market expansion plan, I feel very proud. I still remember the girl who used to sit by the cold storage doorway, patiently listening to me explain every single figure. I think we are just doing 2 different parts of the same job to build our home together. As for my work, it has remained almost unchanged. I still go to the factory early in the morning, wear my protective gear, eat with the workers, and keep my phone by my side at night. As the company expands and the systems become more complex, my responsibilities grow heavier. Just one faulty sensor or a sudden compressor failure could affect hundreds of tons of produce. In the early years, Mai often introduced me to partners as the person who directly renovated and built the company's storage system, but gradually, the way she spoke about her husband changed completely. During an end-of-year reception, someone asked me what position I held at Tonton. Mai smiled lightly, glancing at the uniform I had just changed out of, which still had a few oil stains on the sleeves. She said he isn't cut out for business, he only likes tinkering with machines. I keep him in charge of the technical area so I can have peace of mind. The people at the table burst into laughter. Someone even joked that having a skilled mechanic in the house saves us from having to call outside services. I laughed along so as not to spoil the mood, but inside, I felt a strange emotion I couldn't quite name. I don't need my wife to recount everything I've done, and I certainly don't want to be praised in front of strangers. I just want you to correctly state that I am in charge of the entire technical system, not just a handyman kept by the family for odd jobs. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I brought it up again. I told her I wasn't angry about a joke, but the way Mai introduced me made others completely misunderstand my job. Mai was taking off her earrings in the mirror. She just sighed and said I was being too sensitive. According to her, at a social gathering, nobody has time to hear everyone's full job titles or contributions. She said she kept it brief and simple, with no intention of looking down on me at all. I didn't want to argue, so I just said, I don't need you to talk me up. I just need you not to talk as if my work is insignificant. Mai didn't answer. She turned off the light, turned her back to me, and dismissed it as a trivial matter not worth losing sleep over. The conversation ended quickly, but the hollow feeling inside me didn't go away. From then on, I started noticing many other changes I hadn't paid attention to before. Mai became increasingly annoyed by the smell of grease on my clothes. She demanded I change at the technical room before coming home and forbade me from sitting on the new sofa without showering first. None of those things were wrong in themselves, but her tone made me feel like someone bringing filth into her space. Once, just as I sat down for dinner, I received a notification that the warehouse temperature had risen abnormally. I immediately stood up and grabbed my jacket, getting ready to leave. Mai looked at the dinner table and irritably said I always act as if the whole company would collapse without me. I explained that if the system loses control for just a few hours, the goods inside could suffer billions in damages. Mai retorted that if the company has money, they should hire more people. I shouldn't think I'm so important that I must be present for everything. I listened, not knowing how to respond. Years ago, she used to be the one worried whenever the machines broke, staying up to wait for my return. Now, that same dedication in my wife's eyes has gradually turned into the stubborn habit of someone who doesn't know how to let go of work. Bao Van no longer hid her contempt as she once did. Whenever she heard about an acquaintance's son-in-law buying a car, building a house, or starting a business, she would use it for comparison. She would say, "You've worked for over 10 years, yet you still live in a house on your in-laws' land. Even the car you drive is just an old company liquidation vehicle." I once gently replied that most of my time and effort had been devoted to the company, so I hadn't thought about my own affairs. She immediately replied coldly, "The company pays you a full salary. No one forced you to work for free, so stop acting like you're sacrificing for the whole family." That statement made me fall silent. On paper, she was not wrong. I had a salary, bonuses, and lived in her family's house. But if measured only by payroll hours, no one could count the nights I slept on the machine room floor, the Tet holidays I skipped meals for, or the times I paid out of pocket for emergency supplies to save a shipment. Mr. Tone often noticed the tense atmosphere. He would often seek me out privately. He would pat my shoulder and say that Van was just difficult in her speech. Being a man, I should endure a little for the sake of peace at home. He cared for me, but that care always came with the advice to keep on enduring. I still listened to him. Whenever I felt troubled, I would look at how am I studying or running out to hug my legs. I told myself every family has its conflicts, and as long as a couple does nothing to betray each other, everything can still be mended. It was my very silence that made Mai and Mrs. Van gradually believe I would never leave. In their eyes, I had lived in the north for too long, had no private home, no other job, and no path wide enough to return to Saigon. Yet, at the time, I still didn't understand that one person could give their all to keep an entire system running. But if you don't maintain your self-respect and your own voice, sooner or later, You will be seen as just a machine part, used when needed, replaced when broken, with no one caring how you feel. It was just at the moment when my position in the family became increasingly faded. Mai's younger brother, Do-min Koa, has returned home in a state no one expected. Koa is 6 years younger than Mai and has been spoiled by Ms. Van more than his sister since childhood. He attended university but kept changing his major. He later dropped out to open a phone shop and sell electronics online. In the early years, Koa boasted about his business success, driving nice cars, using expensive phones, and always talking like a market expert. Ms. Van proudly told everyone that her son had a business mind and would surely take over the family business later on. But behind that flashy appearance was a series of poorly calculated decisions. He borrowed money to stock goods for regular customers who owed him, then kept borrowing from elsewhere to cover the cash flow shortage. When a group of creditors showed up at their home, everyone realized Koa's debt had reached nearly 3 billion dong. He not only lost his business capital but also took out high-interest loans to maintain the shop and hide his failure. Ms. Van was afraid the news would get out and hurt the family's reputation, so she immediately stepped in to resolve it. She used some of the company's money to pay off part of the debt, then ordered Koa to close the shop and return to work at the company. I don't oppose giving Koa a chance to start over. Anyone can fail, especially young people lacking experience. What worries me is that Ms. Van didn't let her son start in a suitable position but put him straight into the role of deputy head of operations. He has the authority to approve material purchases, coordinate the warehouse, and intervene in tasks directly related to technical systems. I told Mai privately that Koa has no knowledge of refrigeration, industrial safety, or storage protocols. If he needs to learn the ropes, he could start with order tracking or administrative support, then gradually approach operations. Granting him approval authority right from the start not only makes him prone to mistakes but could also endanger the workers. Mai listened but only told me that I should be understanding. She said her brother just stumbled and his self-esteem is currently wounded. If he starts from a regular staff position, Koa will feel even more inferior. According to her, since I have worked at the company for so long, I just need to be patient in guiding him, and her brother will quickly catch on. Mrs. Van, however, saw the issue from a different perspective. When she learned I didn't agree with delegating authority to Koa, she immediately assumed I was afraid his return would threaten my position. During the meal, she stated bluntly in front of the whole family that this is Koa's legacy. You are only the brother-in-law. No matter how long you work here, you're just a servant, so don't think that managing a few machines means you can boss your employers around. Mr. Tone's face darkened, while Mai quickly brushed it off so the meal wouldn't turn into an argument. I didn't respond, but from that day on, I understood that Koa's arrival was not simply a young man returning to find a fresh start. In Mrs. Van's mind, her son is the only one with ownership and decision-making power, and all the effort I have put in over the years is merely temporary assistance. Not long after, Mrs. Van brought another relative into the company, named Le Kak Tung. He is her nephew. Tung is a few years older than Koa and once started a transport business, but it went bankrupt in less than 3 years. Outsiders only knew that his company faced difficulties due to the market, but those who worked with him said Tung misspent investment funds, using short-term capital to buy luxury cars and expand his image too quickly. Despite his business failure, Tung always appeared with a polished look. He wore expensive shirts, a shiny watch, and drove a long-term rental car, often intentionally letting others think it was his own. Tung's way of speaking was very slick. Every sentence mentioned connections, opportunities, and huge profits. Upon meeting me for the first time, he smiled warmly, patted my shoulder, and said, "Hoi, just stick to handling the machines. Making big money is a job for people with connections like us." I didn't take that comment to heart. In the company, everyone has a different task. If Tung could truly bring in good partners, help expand our output, and reduce costs, I would have no reason to object. But after just a few weeks, he began proposing to replace the entire group of technical suppliers I had worked with for years. According to Tung, these new vendors offered prices 15 to 20% lower and were willing to let the company pay later. He even introduced a logistics firm run by an acquaintance, promising significant reductions in shipping costs. Upon hearing those figures, she immediately supported him, seeing this as her first opportunity to prove her competence. I requested to inspect samples before signing any long-term contracts. When I disassembled some controllers and components, I discovered many items lacked clear documentation of their origin. Some devices looked new on the outside, but the circuit boards inside showed signs of having been resoldered. Certain sensors were labeled as new, but their contact pins were scratched and the protective film showed signs of having been peeled off. I filed a report, recommending that this shipment not be entered into our system. Koa reacted immediately, claiming I was being overly meticulous and intentionally making things difficult for the suppliers he brought in. Tung didn't get angry. He just smiled, turned to Mai, and whispered that veteran technical staff are often afraid of change. If we keep doing things the old way, the company will never grow. Those words struck a chord with Mai. She was eager to prove she could manage independently, without always relying on her husband. A few weeks later, Mai unilaterally approved a batch of test materials without the technical department's sign-off. She only notified me after the goods had already been delivered. I still insisted that they only be installed on a secondary machine unit, not integrated directly into the main production line. Less than 2 days later, the new controller started reporting incorrect temperatures, causing the compressor to run constantly in overload. The motor temperature rose rapidly, and a burning smell started coming from the electrical cabinet. I immediately shut down the system, cut the power, and ordered the more than 20 workers nearby to leave the area. When I opened the cabinet to inspect it, one of the wire ends had already begun to melt. Had I been a few minutes later, the risk of a short circuit and fire spreading to the packaging area would have been very real. After the incident, I requested that the components be kept as they were to determine accountability. But just a day later, the internal report had been edited. The cause, substandard materials, was changed to improper maintenance by the technical department. The final notes even emphasized that the old system had long since deteriorated. I knew Koa had edited the report because his account was used to access it. When I asked, Koa didn't deny it, saying it was just a better way to avoid discrediting the supplier. Tung stood nearby, pretending to mediate, but every word shifted the blame onto me. He even suggested Mai restrict my access to the management system, claiming it lacked transparency for one person to operate and self-evaluate. Mr. Tone began to notice that material expenses were rising unusually. He questioned the accountants, but before he could dig deeper, his health declined sharply. He often suffered from insomnia, chest pain, and once even felt dizzy while reviewing files in his office. I repeatedly suggested taking him to the hospital for a checkup. Mrs. Van insisted he was just overworked and would be fine after a few days of rest. She even told everyone not to mention his health, fearing partners would grow suspicious if they knew the company head was weak. One afternoon, Mr. Tone called me into his office privately. After ensuring no one was in the hallway, he pulled an old, small key from a drawer and placed it in my palm. He did not explain what it opened. He only said slowly, "If anything happens to me, don't trust what others put in front of you, only trust what you can verify yourself." I hadn't even had a chance to ask when the door suddenly opened. Mrs. Van walked in, her eyes immediately locking onto my clenched hand. Mr. Tone quickly shifted the topic to the cold storage, while I quietly slipped the key into my pocket. From Mrs. Van's suspicious gaze and the tension on my father-in-law's face, I knew the key wasn't ordinary, though I didn't yet know what secrets it held. I never expected that those sitting at the same table as me had already begun silently setting a trap to push me out of the very company I had spent over 10 years building. After discovering the substandard controllers, I demanded a complete halt to the installation of all components brought in by Tung. I drew up a separate technical report, clearly listing the item codes, the condition of each device, and the signs indicating they had been repaired. The resoldered circuit boards, overlapping labels, and scratched connectors were all carefully photographed by me. I proposed that the company send samples to an independent testing facility. As soon as the results confirmed the components didn't meet the promised quality standards, we could return the entire shipment and hold the supplier accountable. But Mai didn't agree. She argued that sending goods for testing would be too time-consuming, affecting the new warehouse schedule and making our partners feel mistrusted. Tung maintained his usual soft-spoken attitude. He didn't directly challenge my expertise, but instead remarked to everyone that while being careful is good, suspicious business practices would scare off any long-term partners. The statement sounded very reasonable, enough for Mai and Koa to feel I was overreacting. I did not back down. I sealed the unused components, demanding that no one remove them from the warehouse without a signature from the technical department. However, just a few days later, Mr. Sao came to see me looking uneasy. He said that the previous night, Koa had people move a portion of the stock to the old warehouse at the back of the facility, where few people go. The transfer took place after working hours and without an outgoing stock voucher. On the management software, The codes for those components were also changed to a secondary materials category, making it very difficult for an ordinary inspector to detect. I immediately went with Mr. Sao to the security room to check the cameras. But the footage covering nearly 2 hours had vanished. The camera operator stated the system wasn't broken. The data was deleted using an admin account issued to KOA less than a month ago. I confronted Mai about this, hoping she would at least ask her brother for an explanation, but Mai just frowned and said I was trying to turn an internal error into a serious conspiracy. She even accused me of always looking at KOA with defensive eyes. I reminded her that this was not about family matters, but the safety of the entire system. Mai was silent for a few seconds before saying something that sent a chill down my spine. Kwa is my own younger brother. Don't let work disagreements make you always think the worst of him. I didn't say anything more. I understood that the more I argued, the more Mai would think I was trying to hold on to power in the company, but my professional intuition wouldn't let me ignore it. I ordered the technical team not to install any equipment from that supplier without my confirmation. Less than a week later, the incident I feared happened. That night, not long after I got home, I received a call saying the east processing area had strange vibrations, followed by cold gas leaking near the main pipeline. I immediately rushed to the warehouse. From the yard, I could already hear the alarms ringing continuously. Workers were panicking as they ran out of the work area. A newly replaced pressure valve got stuck, causing the pressure in the pipe to rise rapidly. A nearby joint vibrated violently, then cracked, and the refrigerant escaped, creating a thick layer of white frost. 3 workers closest to it suffered frostbite and breathing difficulties. Among them, Lam, a 24-year-old, fainted near the warehouse door after running back in to pull a colleague out. I had the power cut to the entire area, started the emergency ventilation system, and helped Mr. Sao bring the injured out to the yard. Lam lay motionless on the stretcher, his pale hands still tightly clutching the shirt of the colleague he had just saved. That moment made all family disputes feel meaningless. This was no longer about who was right or who was wrong in a meeting. A poor quality piece of equipment had truly pushed people to the brink of death. I went with the ambulance to take the victims to the hospital. Lam's mother arrived from the countryside near dawn, her clothes disheveled and her plastic sandals covered in mud. She grabbed my hand, asking if her son would pull through. I didn't dare to promise, only saying the doctors were trying their best and the company would take full responsibility. While I was still at the hospital, Hua had people remove the entire valve assembly that caused the incident. The remaining components in the warehouse were loaded onto a small truck and moved before dawn. When Mr. Sao discovered this, he tried to stop them, but KOA claimed it was an executive order to prevent further risks to the system. Fortunately, Mr. Sao managed to keep one valve and its packaging. He hid them in his personal tool cabinet and warned me not to tell anyone. It was the only piece of evidence left intact after the accident site was cleared. The next morning, I returned to the company in an almost exhausted state. An incident report was already waiting on my desk. It stated that the pipes had deteriorated over time, and the technical department failed to perform regular maintenance, missing the leak risk. My name was listed as the person directly responsible. Even though I hadn't signed it, the conclusion was written as if everything were clear and nothing further needed to be investigated. I took the report straight to the meeting room and slammed it down in front of KOA. I asked why he was so quick to blame the technical department while 3 people were still in the hospital. KOA showed no remorse. He just leaned back and said, as the technical manager paid to run the system, "You must take responsibility when accidents happen." I replied that taking responsibility does not mean taking the blame for those who installed low-quality parts into the machine. I demanded that the scene be preserved, the moved components recalled, and an independent unit brought in to inspect. Mai walked in just as the atmosphere was growing tense. She didn't ask about the condition of the injured. She only urged everyone to calmly sign the temporary report so the company could process insurance claims. I made it clear that I would not sign any document that concealed the origin of the equipment. Tong had been standing by the door for a while. He slowly reminded me to think of my wife and children before turning an internal issue into something irreparable. Then he lowered his voice, just enough for me to hear. "A man fighting the whole family rarely has a happy ending." I looked at him, and for the first time, I could no longer see the polished exterior of a businessman. Behind that calm smile lies the coldness of someone who has prepared an escape route for themselves and set up a scapegoat to bear the consequences. I left the meeting room without signing the report. In my pocket, the key Mr. Tone gave me remained still. Meanwhile, at the hospital, a worker is suffering in pain, all because of a batch of components that someone knew were unsafe but insisted on using anyway. From that moment, I understood that I could no longer endure just to keep the peace in the family. If I take one more step back, the next person to pay the price might not just be me. After the accident at the cold storage, the atmosphere in the company became unusually heavy. 3 workers are still hospitalized. Meanwhile, a report assigning blame to the technical department was circulated internally as if the cause of the incident had been settled. I didn't sign it, but the mere fact that my name appeared in the files was enough for people to start looking at me with suspicion. When Mr. Tone learned of the matter, he requested all purchase invoices from the last 18 months be brought to his office. His health was poor then. He was pale and his eyes were constantly dark from lack of sleep, yet he sat there cross-referencing every invoice with the warehouse logs himself. He no longer trusted the summary reports left on his desk. Within just a few days, he discovered that the amount the company had transferred to the group of suppliers introduced by Tung exceeded 8 billion Vietnamese dongs. Meanwhile, the actual amount of materials recorded in the warehouse was much lower. There were shipments paid for in full, yet no inspection slips could be found, nor was there any record proving they were ever installed in the system. Even more unusual was that many payments were split into smaller transactions, just low enough to avoid requiring Mr. Tone's direct signature. The person who approved most of them was Mai or Koa. On paper, everything seemed legitimate. But when placed side by side, they looked like pieces of a puzzle carefully arranged to avoid the oversight of the company head. He called Mai into his office and placed each file folder in front of his daughter. Mai explained that those businesses belonged to the same supply group. Tung had vouched for their reputation, so she didn't look into it deeply. She even thought that as the company expanded, splitting contracts among multiple vendors was normal. Mr. Tone was so angry he had to place a hand over his chest. He said, "You signed off on billions based on a single word from a family friend. Are you running this company or gambling away our family's assets?" Mai flushed, and instead of admitting her negligence, she claimed her father always doubted her abilities. She noted that since I joined, he consulted me first on all technical matters, leaving her as deputy director without full authority. I stood in the hallway, feeling heavy-hearted as I listened to the argument. I never wanted to compete with my wife, but Tung had skillfully used my presence to make Mai feel slighted by her own family. Tung appeared at the height of the tension, carrying a neatly organized file containing invoices, receipts, and technical inspection reports. He calmly explained that all transactions were legal, and the discrepancies were just due to shipments sent directly to satellite warehouses. Then, he placed several inspection slips in front of Mr. Tone with signatures that looked remarkably like mine. The documents stated that I had approved the system for operation before the new components were even installed. I knew something was wrong just by glancing at them. Some of the dates on the slips coincided with the time I was fixing an incident at the warehouse. Nearly 100 kilometers away, Mr. Sao immediately grabbed the shift log and vehicle schedule to cross-reference, which clearly noted my departure time, driver, and destination. Tung wasn't flustered. He simply said handwritten logs could be added later, whereas official records were what actually mattered. His tone was gentle, yet it made all the evidence from a longtime employee seem completely unreliable. When the meeting ended, Tung caught up with Mr. Sao alone in the hallway. He didn't make loud threats, just smiled and reminded him that he was old, and his wife and children lived near the company. He said if a shift log book were to go missing, your word would just be a story. Mr. Sao didn't reply, but that evening he called me, his voice much lower. He said he had taken his wife and children to stay at a relative's house for a few days. He wasn't afraid of losing his job, just worried Tung might do something extreme if he felt cornered. The next morning, Mr. Sao's office was broken into. The cabinet holding the shift logs was ransacked, with papers scattered all over the floor. Luckily, the valves saved after the accident and the packaging were moved to his brother's house, so they weren't taken. I suggested that Mr. Sao take some time off to stay out of danger. He shook his head and said, "If I leave now, it will be even easier for Tung to frame me." His firmness left me feeling both grateful and anxious. A foreman nearing retirement is fighting for justice while those in power seek to distort the truth. Mr. Tone no longer believed that internal audits were enough. He quietly contacted an old friend who used to work as an auditor for small and medium enterprises. The two met outside the company, careful to keep it from Mrs. Van, Koa, and Tung. After reviewing the bank data, his friend found that some material funds were funneled through 3 shell companies before returning to a transport firm Koa secretly invested in. This company had almost no active vehicles but still issued massive invoices for transport services every month. Some of the funds were further used to pay off old debts from Koa's phone shop. Some transactions were even transferred to the personal account of the person who bought a car for his girlfriend. The cash flow was no longer just a sign of poor management. It showed that someone was intentionally using the family business for personal gain. Mr. Tone copied all the data onto a small hard drive. He didn't keep it in the usual safe because he knew people in the house might find it. Instead, he hid it in a secret compartment of an old filing cabinet near the administrative storage. Only then did I realize the small key he gave me was for that cabinet. He had chosen me to hold the key to the evidence, because among those closest to him, he no longer knew who he could fully trust. He called to arrange for me to come to his office late in the afternoon. His voice was very weak but firm. He only said there was an important matter he needed to hand over. I was at the hospital visiting Lam, so I promised to return as soon as I handed him over to his family. But before I could arrive, the company called to report that Mr. Tone had collapsed in his office. Not long before that, Koa had brought his father a cup of hot tea. An employee heard a loud noise but thought an object had fallen, so they didn't run in immediately. The first person to appear in the room was Tung. Instead of immediately calling for emergency services, he picked up Mr. Tone's phone, checked the screen, and deleted some of the most recent calls. Luckily, a cleaner passing by saw him lying motionless on the floor and shouted for help. I had just reached the gate when I heard people calling out in chaos. I ran straight to the room and saw my father-in-law pale, one hand still clutching his chest tightly. I didn't have time to ask anything. I helped the staff get him into the car, calling the hospital to prepare for cardiac emergency on the way. The doctor confirmed he had suffered a myocardial infarction due to high blood pressure. The fall caused his head to hit the floor, but luckily it didn't cause serious injury. There was no evidence that the teacup contained anything unusual. However, the fact that he fell ill right before our meeting, along with Tung's action of clearing the phone, made me unable to view it all as just a coincidence. While Mr. Tone was still in the emergency room, Tung pulled Mai into a corner. I stood not far away, hearing him advise her to quickly seize signing authority, otherwise the company would fall into someone else's hands. He spoke very quietly but clearly. He is this weak now. If you don't step up right away, tomorrow someone else will be sitting in your seat. I knew the someone else he wanted Mai to guard against was me. And even when Mr. Tone was not yet out of danger, Tung had started turning a father's crisis into an opportunity to seize control of the company. 3 days after Mr. Tone was admitted to the hospital, I almost didn't leave the cardiology ward hallway. During the day, I took the opportunity to call the company to ask about the warehouse system situation and instruct Mr. Sao on things that needed checking. At night, I sit on a plastic chair by the hospital room door, only napping in short bursts for fear my father-in-law might take a sudden turn for the worse. Mai still visits the hospital regularly, but mostly she only stays for a few hours. The company is in chaos, and major contracts have come to a standstill. Workers are anxious after the accident, while Koa and Tung keep pressuring her to sign documents Mr. Tone hasn't processed. Every time the phone rings, Mai steps outside for a long conversation before rushing back to the company. Van stays by her husband's side, but always keeps her distance from me. She no longer openly criticizes me like she did before. Her suspicious gaze still follows every one of my moves. Perhaps she believes that Mr. Tone giving the key to his son-in-law is a sign he is silently handing over power that should belong to his own children. On the third night, Mr. Tone stayed awake for quite a while. He couldn't speak clearly yet because his body was still weak, but he recognized that I was sitting by his bedside. I helped him drink some water and was about to call the nurse when he suddenly grabbed my wrist. His thin, ice-cold fingers held on very tightly. He leaned in close and whispered, "The key, don't give it to anyone, not even Mai." I froze. This was the first time he had made it clear that even his own daughter might not be trustworthy in this matter. I intended to ask more, but his breathing had already become labored. Just then, Mrs. Van walked in, and seeing her husband holding my hand, she immediately approached and asked what he had just said. I didn't want him to get stressed, so I just said he was tired and was telling me to look after work. Mrs. Van didn't fully believe me. Her eyes lingered for a long time on the shirt pocket where I was keeping the key, but because the doctor walked in for a checkup, she didn't ask any further. The next morning, just as I went down to the canteen to buy porridge, my phone suddenly rang. The caller was Uncle Tu. He is the neighbor living next to my father's house in Saigon. His voice was urgent. There was a lot of noise from people talking in the background. He said my father had fainted in the bathroom early that morning. Luckily, someone came over to knock on the door and, getting no answer, asked the neighborhood committee to break the lock and check. He was rushed to the emergency room in a state of difficulty breathing and high fever. The doctor suspects heart failure accompanied by pneumonia. The hospital currently needs a relative to come and sign the treatment papers and complete the necessary procedures. I stood motionless in the hallway, still holding the bowl of hot porridge in my hand. In my mind, I pictured the small house in Saigon, where my father has been lying alone for years. Yet I always consoled myself that just sending money regularly and calling to check in fulfilled my duty. Uncle Tu added that my father had been weak for a few days but didn't tell me, fearing I was busy with my in-laws. That statement made my chest tighten with grief. Mr. Tone is lying right before me, cared for by his wife, children, and a medical team, while my own father is over 1,000 kilometers away, with only a few kind neighbors by his side. I immediately told Mai that I had to return to Saigon today. I hoped at the very least she would ask about my father's condition first, but Mai's first reaction was to look at me in a panic and ask who would take responsibility for the accident and the warehouse system if I left now. I said the company has an entire technical department, plus Mr. Sao and the long-term staff. I would write down everything needing to be handed over, but she still wasn't reassured. She reminded me that my name is on the incident report. If I were to leave suddenly, partners and employees would think I'm dodging responsibility. Tung, who was standing nearby, immediately chimed in. He spoke in a tone that sounded objective, saying how convenient it was that the company lost money, the accident occurred, and Mr. Tone fell ill at the same time. My returning to Saigon would easily make outsiders suspicious. I stared straight at him. My father is in emergency care, and if you still use that to frame me, you are no longer human. Tung just shrugged. He said he wasn't judging, only mentioning what others might think. That very cold attitude made me realize he didn't just want to keep me here. He wanted to turn my going home to care for my father into a sign of guilt to use when needed. Mrs. Van didn't sympathize when she heard the story either. She demanded that I stay until the handover is complete, the liability waiver is signed, and all keys to the technical areas are returned. She said my father has doctors and neighbors for support, while this company provides a living for my wife, children, and hundreds of workers. I have tried to be patient for 12 years, but this time I cannot remain silent. I made it clear that during that time, I looked after every shipment, every machine, and sacrificed many days off for the company. But my father has only one son. My returning home was not to ask for anyone's permission. Mai pulled me into a corner of the hallway, lowering her voice to beg me to wait 2 more days. She said if I left now, Koa and Tung would take full control, and she wouldn't have enough people to manage the company. I looked at the wife I've lived with for over 10 years and asked, do you want me to stay because I'm your husband, or because without me, your company is in danger? Mai pursed her lips but didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any words could. It showed me that in the moment of choice, what she feared losing wasn't her husband, but the ability to operate the family business. Mr. Sao found out and proactively took over all my handover tasks. He brought an old phone to the hospital. Inside were photos of the spare parts batch and a video of the truck leaving the warehouse at night. He said, just go home to take care of your father. I will keep whatever needs to be kept. Lam, who was still undergoing treatment, also called me. His voice was weak but firm, insisting he was ready to testify that the valve that caused the accident was a newly installed part, not an old pipe as the report stated. The kindness of people with no blood relation made me feel both warmed and bitter. Ordinary workers understand that I need to return to my father. Meanwhile, those who call me husband or son-in-law only see a position about to be left vacant. Before leaving the hospital, I went to say goodbye to Mr. Tone. He was still very weak but conscious. I leaned down and said, my father is in emergency care. I have to return to Saigon immediately. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slightly, his hand twitching as if to urge me on. I understood that as his consent, and perhaps an unspoken apology. I left the room, booked the earliest flight, and returned home to pack a few clothes. This time, I no longer feel like I am just asking for a few days off. I had a distinct feeling that once I stepped through that gate, my life would never be the same again. The car pulled up to the company gate in the early afternoon. I stepped out, only thinking about packing a few clothes, grabbing my documents, and heading to the airport for my flight. But the moment I saw the iron gate ajar and 2 security guards standing on either side, I sensed that something was wrong. Since marrying Mai, I had always come and gone through that same entrance. The small house behind the workshop, though on my in-laws' property, had been my home for over 10 years. Yet that day, the guard saw me and stepped out to block the gate, his eyes uneasy as if he didn't know whether to call me Mr. Hoy or treat me like a stranger. Before I could even ask, Mrs. Van walked out from the courtyard. Following behind her were Koa, Tung, and another security guard. All four of them stood in a line, as if they had been waiting for a long time. Mai was not there. I guessed she was still at the hospital with Mr. Tone, or perhaps Mrs. Van intentionally chose this time while her daughter was away to settle things with me. Mrs. Van didn't ask how my father was doing, nor did she mention my flight. She just looked me up and down and said, "The house behind the workshop has had its locks changed. From now on, you are not to enter this property without the family's permission." I thought I had misheard her. My marriage to Mai was still legally binding. My clothes, documents, and personal belongings were all still inside that house. I asked her by what right she could stop me from entering the place I had lived for 12 years. Mrs. Van replied very coldly that the land, the house, and most of the belongings inside were all legally owned by her and her husband. According to her, I had abandoned the company right when the accident happened. Since Mr. Tone was hospitalized and the books weren't cleared up, the family could no longer let me move freely in the production area. Every word she spoke was carefully prepared. My return to care for my birth father had been twisted into an act of desertion. The years I spent monitoring machines, saving shipments, and keeping the system running were no longer mentioned. In her eyes back then, I was just someone who could bring misfortune through these gates. Kwa stepped aside and pulled out an old duffel bag. The bag was faded, the zipper was torn in one spot, and the straps were covered in dust. He threw it onto the courtyard floor at my feet. Inside were a few clothes stuffed haphazardly, old safety shoes, a face towel, and some personal items. I recognized it as the bag I used to carry tools in for business trips many years ago. It had been in the storage room behind the house. I hadn't touched it in ages. Perhaps they had just grabbed whatever they saw and shoved it in, as long as it got me out of the house as fast as possible. Mrs. Van pointed at the bag, her voice high and sharp. "Take it and get lost. Don't you ever show your face around here again." That statement echoed across the wide courtyard, loud enough for the workers near the packing area to hear. I didn't bend down immediately. I looked at the woman I had called mother for over 10 years, trying to find a trace of hesitation or regret on her face, but there was none. I asked if this was Mai's decision. She immediately said her daughter would come to her senses and understand she couldn't spend her life with someone who only cared about machines and brought trouble to the family. I didn't want to argue. My birth father was in the hospital, Mr. Tone was still in critical condition, and before me were people who had decided not to give me a decent explanation. I knew any argument at this point would only make the scene look uglier. Kwa stepped up and demanded I hand over my company phone, access card, keys to the technical rooms, and any copied documents. I took the company belongings and placed them on the guard's desk, checking each item in front of everyone. As for the small key Mr. Tone had given me, I kept it in my pocket. Koa didn't know about that, but Tung noticed the moment my hand rested on my pocket. He asked if I was still holding on to any company keys or property. I replied that I had handed over all company assets, and personal items given to me by others were not for him to inspect. Tung took a step forward, insisting that anything taken from Mr. Tone's room must be left behind. His overly quick reaction made me suspicious. I asked him if he knew what that key opened, since he was so impatient. Tung paused briefly, then quickly regained his composure, saying he just wanted everything to be transparent. But that very moment of hesitation only made me more certain that the item Mr. Tone gave me was linked to what Tung was trying to hide. Bao Van signaled for the security guard to step forward and check the bag. I immediately lifted the bag, not letting anyone touch it. I said if they suspected me of taking company property, they could call the authorities to file a report and conduct a public search. No one has the right to rummage through personal belongings in the courtyard just because they claim to own the house. Tung immediately stopped Bao Van. He did not want outsiders involved while there were too many unclear matters within the company. He gave a cold laugh, saying to let me go, because sooner or later I would return. In his view, someone with no home, no job, and who had lived in the north for too long couldn't possibly start over elsewhere. I bent down to lift the tattered bag. It was heavier than I expected, but at the time, I just thought there were more old tools inside. I took one last look at the house behind the workshop, where my daughter was born, where my wife and I shared late meals, and where I thought I would spend the rest of my life. I told them that 12 years ago, I arrived in the north with only a small suitcase. Today I leave with just an old bag, but my skills, my self-respect, and my ability to support myself never belonged to their family. As I walked through the gate, a group of workers who had just finished their shift stood by the roadside. No one dared to speak up, but many silently bowed their heads in greeting. A female worker, whom I had once lent money to for her child's medical treatment, ran over and pressed a warm lunchbox into my hand. She said the road to the airport was long, and I should take it to eat on the way. I accepted the lunchbox but refused the small amount of money everyone had gathered for me. I told them not to confront Koa and Tung for my sake. Those with families must prioritize their own safety first. As for the truth, if there is evidence, it will come to light sooner or later. Just as the car left the company gate, Mr. Sao called. He reported that the old filing cabinet near the storage room had been unlocked, but the secret compartment below remained sealed. I touched the key in my pocket, feeling even more uneasy. The tattered bag at my feet occasionally clinked with the sound of metal at every turn. I had no time to check it, so I just pulled it closer to the seat and glanced at my watch. The only thing on my mind then was to get back to my father as soon as possible. I had no idea that while they were hastily packing my things to kick me out, a metal box mistakenly taken from Mr. Tone's room had been shoved to the bottom of the bag. And that very item they accidentally gave me would become the thing that causes all their lies to crumble. I arrived in Saigon when it was nearly midnight. The trip from the airport to the hospital took nearly another hour due to traffic and sudden rain. Throughout the journey, the tattered bag remained at my feet, occasionally letting out the sound of metal clinking together. But at that moment, I had no mind to care about what was inside. My father lay in the cardiac ward, his face pale and his breathing still heavy. Uncle Tu and a few neighbors took turns staying to look after him. Some bought porridge, some got medicine, others ran home to fetch more clothes. They weren't relatives, yet they helped my father while his only son was over 1,000 kilometers away. Uncle Tu said they had chipped in to pay the initial hospital fees. I hurried to pay them back, but he waved his hand, saying that my father used to fix the electricity for the whole neighborhood and never charged the struggling families. Now that he's in trouble, it's only natural for everyone to help in return. Hearing that, I felt both warmed and heartbroken. For many years, I lived in a large family and worked for a major company, but when my father fell, the ones who took him to the hospital were just ordinary neighbors. Back in the north, they were only worried that my departure would affect the records and machinery. Around 1 a.m., Dad woke up. He looked at me for a long time, as if to make sure his son standing before him wasn't just a hallucination. I leaned down to hold his thin, cold hand, apologizing for coming home so late. Dad didn't blame me, he just softly asked, "Did they let you leave?" The question was gentle, but it made my throat tighten. I didn't tell him I had been kicked out, only saying the company was having issues, but I had finished the handover and would stay with him more from now on. Dad looked at the old bag by the foot of the bed and fell silent. Perhaps he understood part of it. The bag was so tattered that it would be hard for someone on a short trip to use, let alone for all the belongings of someone who just left a house they'd lived in for 12 years. Dad fell back asleep after taking his medicine. I sat by the bed until nearly morning before asking Uncle Tu to watch him for a while. Then I took the bag to our old house. The wooden door was still the one Dad had repaired with his own hands years ago. In the living room, the ceiling fan hummed steadily, and a photo of Mom with the two of us before she passed still hung on the wall. I set the bag on the floor and went to take out the clothes to wash, but I found the zipper stuck fast. The side fabric was torn, revealing a corner of gray metal inside. I used pliers to cut the broken zipper and pulled the bag open wide. Underneath some old clothes was a metal toolbox. It wasn't mine. I recognized it as the box usually kept on a low shelf in Mr. Tone's office, where he stored odds and ends and some old technical items. Perhaps when packing things up, someone saw the box near my safety shoes and assumed it was my equipment. Or perhaps an employee assigned to clean up had hurriedly shoved everything related to technical work into the bag without checking. I tried to open it, but the box was locked. The small key Mr. Tone gave me fit the side lock perfectly. When the lid popped open, I finally understood why Tung was so anxious when he saw me holding that key. Inside, there was no money or anything valuable. There was only a portable hard drive, an old black notebook, and a push-button phone. At the bottom of the box was a thin compartment held by a metal latch. I opened the notebook first. The handwriting inside belonged to Mr. Tone. Each entry was brief, clearly noting dates, contract numbers, and suspicious payments. 3 company names were repeated multiple times, accompanied by fragmented figures. There was a payment of over 1 billion Vietnamese dongs listed as shipping fees, but beside it, Mr. Tone noted that there was no vehicle schedule and no delivery confirmation. On the later pages, the handwriting became more illegible. Perhaps he wrote them while his health was declining. The very last line made me pause for a long time. Quote, "If something happens to me, check the hallway camera and the cup of tea Koa brought in." I knew this was just his suspicion, not proof that Koa had done anything to the tea. But it proved that before he collapsed, he felt he was being deceived and threatened by those around him. I used the key to open the thin compartment underneath. Inside was a small memory card with a piece of paper stuck to it, reading, "Original." I plugged the card into my father's old computer and opened each file. The first video clip recorded the warehouse area after the accident. The time displayed was past 3 a.m., exactly when I was still at the hospital. In the footage, Koa and 2 employees removed the valve assembly from the pipeline and loaded it onto a truck. Tung stood nearby, directly handling some component boxes, peeling off old labels and replacing them with others. Another clip filmed from the hallway corner shows Tung carrying a stack of files into the administrative office. He told Koa to put my name on all the technical documents, because if something went wrong, it was better for Hoi alone to take the fall than for everyone to die together. I listened to that sentence over and over. It wasn't something said in the heat of the moment. Tung had planned in advance to make me the scapegoat for their wrongdoings. On the memory card, there were also photos of blank forms bearing my real signature. These were forms I had signed to confirm receipt of documents or completion of maintenance in a different area. The content above had been altered, forged into an acceptance report for a batch of components I never authorized. But what hurt me the most wasn't Tung's words or Koa's actions, but a recording of a conversation between Mai and the accounting department. In it, Mai admitted the equipment shipment lacked technical documentation but still demanded payment to meet the schedule. She even told the staff not to inform me, fearing I would object and delay the opening of the new warehouse. Mai didn't directly ask for the signatures to be forged. She also didn't know the accident would happen, but she was clearly aware of the risks. She still chose to hide it because she wanted to prove she could manage without her husband. I sat motionless in front of the screen for a very long time. All these past days, I kept trying to console myself that Mai was just being influenced by her mother and brother. But that recording showed she had made her own choices. She wasn't on the sidelines. She just didn't expect that choice to lead to such serious consequences. Right then, the keypad phone in the box suddenly started ringing. I looked at the screen, saw an unsaved number, turned on the recorder on my phone, and then picked up without saying a word. On the other end was Tung's voice. He thought Koa was holding the phone, so he pressed, "Have you found the box yet?" When he heard no answer, he lowered his voice and said, "If that box falls into his hands, neither of us will have a way out." He then told Koa he had to head to Saigon immediately to retrieve the evidence before I could hand it over to anyone else. He even mentioned using my father's condition or my daughter to force me into a deal. I hung up and backed up all the data onto 3 different devices. One encrypted copy was sent to Mr. Sao, one was sent to a lawyer friend, and I kept the original separate. I didn't intend to confront them emotionally, and I certainly wasn't going to leave all the evidence in one place. Once finished, I picked up my phone and sent Mai a short message. Quote, "Ask your mother if there is anything missing from the bag she threw at me." Just a few minutes later, Mai called repeatedly. I watched her name light up on the screen but didn't answer. My father is still in the hospital, and I need to be calm enough to understand what I must do next. That night, in my father's small house, I learned the truth was far greater than just a technical accident. The ragged bag they threw at my feet to drive me away ended up holding the very things they feared losing most. And from that moment on, I was no longer someone who would just stand still and endure. After switching off the old phone, I didn't call Tung back, nor did I immediately send all the evidence to Mai or Ms. Van. What I had just heard made me tremble with rage, but the angrier I got, the more I understood I couldn't act impulsively. If I went public too soon, Koa and Tung could delete the remaining data, pressure the workers, or shift the blame onto subordinates who were just following orders. I checked every file once more and then copied the data onto several separate devices. The original was tucked into a moisture-proof box, and I sent a copy to an old friend working as a lawyer in Saigon. I asked him to help me preserve the evidence so the source would be clear, preventing anyone later from claiming the data had been edited or manipulated. My friend advised me absolutely not to post the recording on social media. Doing so might offer momentary relief, but it would turn the matter into a public family feud, affecting my daughter and innocent workers. I agreed. What I need is to clarify the truth, not turn my pain into something for outsiders to gossip about. After that, I called Mr. Sao. As soon as I heard his voice, I asked about his family's situation first, not about the valve or the files. He said his wife and children were still staying with relatives. He himself was temporarily sleeping at the warehouse to avoid strangers coming to his home. Hearing that, I felt guilty. A man nearing retirement should only be worrying about his final shifts, yet he was dragged into a dispute between people with money and power. I warned him not to confront Koa or Tung directly anymore. Keep what needs to be kept in a safe place, and if anyone forces you to sign documents, demand a record be made with witnesses present. I made it very clear: protect yourself first, save the evidence second. No logbook or valve is worth trading your family's peace for. Mr. Sao was silent for a moment before replying that he understood. However, the situation at the company is becoming increasingly chaotic. After the accident, many workers resigned for fear of being held responsible. Some were asked to sign pre-written statements claiming the system was degraded and that I knew about the risks but failed to address them. I asked Mr. Sao to tell everyone that no one needs to stand up for me. They only need to say exactly what they saw, without adding or omitting anything, and not to sign anything they haven't read carefully. Wage earners have parents, wives, and children to support. I do not want to force them into a direct confrontation with the business owners just for the sake of my reputation. Mr. Sao added that Lam is out of danger, but his lungs are still damaged. His hands suffered frostbite and require long-term treatment. The company only advanced part of the medical fees, then demanded his mother sign a statement confirming it was an accident caused by faulty, aging equipment. The woman doesn't understand legal papers. She only knows that if she doesn't sign, she fears her son's medical bills won't be covered. Hearing this, I immediately contacted Lam's mother. She cried as soon as she heard my voice, insisting that the family dare not cause trouble for the company, only wishing for her son to live and remain able to work. I did not promise things I wasn't sure I could do. I only told her not to sign any more documents. All treatment invoices must be kept in full. I transferred a sum of money to Lam's family for their immediate living and medical expenses. Through a lawyer friend, I clearly stated that this is a voluntary personal contribution, not tied to any testimony or commitment. I do not want my kindness to be distorted later by others as witness tampering. Lam's mother initially insisted on refusing. She said the family already owed me a debt of gratitude because I was the one who rushed her son to the emergency room. She couldn't continue to accept the money. I had to explain that Lam was injured while returning to save his colleague, and the accident occurred in a place where I was once technically responsible. Even though it wasn't my fault, I couldn't ignore the fact that a young person was suffering because of someone else's recklessness. I told him this money wasn't to make him speak well of me. I just didn't want him to worry about his son's life while struggling to afford every meal. After that call, Lam messaged me back using his mother's phone. He was still weak but insisted on recounting exactly what he witnessed. The two other injured workers also agreed to save photos of the new valves, the text messages regarding the night shift and the time the department demanded the equipment be installed without final approval. I don't see that as a victory. Every piece of information they provided was tied to the pain and fear of the workers. The more evidence I gathered, the more clearly I saw that if I stayed silent, the most vulnerable people would be the first ones sacrificed. During those days, my father's health gradually stabilized. He still needed supplemental oxygen occasionally but could sit up and eat porridge. I didn't tell him everything, just that there was conflict in my wife's family and I needed time to sort it out. Father looked at me and asked if I had been kicked out of the house. I didn't answer immediately. He pointed to the battered bag by the cabinet and said, "Someone visiting their father for a few days wouldn't bring all their shoes and tools like that." I lowered my head and recounted the main parts of what happened. Father listened from beginning to end, never scolded my in-laws, and didn't urge me to retaliate. He only said it was right to protect myself, but don't let a few people who hurt you make you view everyone as a villain. His words made me think of Mai. I had heard her own voice admitting to hiding the shipment that lacked documentation. I was disappointed, But I also understood she wasn't the mastermind behind forging papers or profiting from middlemen. If I released the recording just to embarrass her, the person who would suffer the most in the long run would be I. I decided to answer Mai's next call. When the phone rang again, I picked up without any reproach. The first thing I asked about was Mr. Tone's condition. Mai seemed surprised. She said he had regained consciousness but was still very weak. The doctor requested that he avoid any strong emotions. Only then did she ask if the bag Mom gave me contained any company documents or items. Hearing that, I only asked back, "Are you worried about Dad, the company, or what I might already know?" Mai was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was choked. She admitted that Koa and Tung were searching for a box Mr. Tone often kept in his office. Mrs. Van also started to grow suspicious, but she still couldn't believe her own son would take company money and pin the blame on his brother-in-law. I didn't tell her I was holding all the evidence. I only told Mai to stop signing any documents, back up the accounting data, and not tell Koa that we had spoken. After that, I sent her only one photo of Tung replacing labels on old components. A few minutes later, Mai called back, asking if I still considered her my wife. I looked at my father sleeping in his hospital bed and replied slowly, "I still remember you are the mother of my child, but as for being husband and wife, we'll have to see if you choose to stand by the truth this time or keep siding with your family at any cost." Mai didn't make excuses. She just said one sentence I hadn't heard from her in years. "You just stay there and take care of Dad. The mess I caused, this time I have to face it myself." The call ended, and I still couldn't trust her completely. But I knew I had given Mai one final chance. Not a chance to save the company or fix our marriage with a few apologies, but a chance to prove that in the hardest of times, she still has the courage to choose what is right. After our call, Mai did not immediately confront Koa or Tung. She understood that if she let it slip that she was suspicious, all remaining data in the company could be wiped before it could be checked. The next morning, Mai returned to the office as usual, still attended the delivery meeting, and didn't mention the photo I had sent. She used the excuse that since Mr. Tone was hospitalized, the company needed to prepare a financial audit to report back to him when he woke up. Mai requested that the accounting department back up all contracts, payment orders, emails, and warehouse data from the last 2 years onto an independent computer. This machine was disconnected from the internal network after the copy, to prevent the data from being tampered with remotely. The person Mai chose to assist her was Ms. Nguyen T. Wah, a general accountant who had been working at Ton Tone for 8 years. Ms. Wah was naturally careful, quiet, and not part of Koa or Tung's inner circle. In the past, she had often asked about invoices missing delivery receipts but was always brushed off by Koa, claiming that leadership matters had their own people in charge. At first, Ms. Wah was very fearful. She said she was just an employee, her husband was unemployed, and her 2 children were still in school. If she were fired, the whole family would have no support. Mai did not force her to take her side. She only asked her to record exactly what was in the books and to draft a document confirming she was not responsible for the executive board's spending decisions. It was this very caution that convinced Ms. Wah to agree. The two began cross-referencing accounting data with vehicle logs, warehouse receipts, and the times the technical system received supplies. After just one morning, the irregularities appeared much more clearly than in any previous summary reports. Some warehouse receipts were created at nearly 2 a.m., a time when there were no delivery shifts. The account used was under the name of a warehouse employee who had quit over half a year ago. Some shipments were recorded as put into use, but the machinery list had no equipment with the corresponding code. Many payments to intermediary companies were then further transferred to personal accounts. A portion of the money was used to pay off an old loan from Koa's phone store. Another portion was used to pay for a car registered in his girlfriend's name. What could previously be explained as loose management had by then become clear signs of intentional embezzlement from the company. Mai sat in front of the screen for a long time. She had once thought her younger brother just lacked experience, and that Tung, though cunning, at least wanted the company to grow so they could all benefit. Only when she saw every cash flow did she realize those people did not consider Ton Tone a legacy to be preserved. They saw it as a big purse, where whoever had the authority to sign could take their share. In the afternoon, Mai called Koa into the meeting room. She didn't bring all the data, just placed a few of the most glaring transaction copies in front of her younger brother. As soon as Koa saw the recipient's account name, his face changed color, but he still tried to maintain a calm expression. Mai asked him directly how long he had been taking money from the company. He didn't answer immediately, instead turning to blame his sister for secretly investigating her own family. Koa then justified that the money was only an advance to resolve personal difficulties. Once things stabilized, he would pay it all back. Mai asked, then how would the car, the expenses, and the shipping invoices for non-existent shipments be paid back? Koa began to lose his composure. He said the family had used company money to invest in machinery per my proposal, paid me a high salary, and let my spouse and me live on family land. In Koa's mind, if an outsider like me could enjoy so much, then as the biological son, he had even more right to use the assets. Mai looked at her brother and felt like he was a stranger. She said the money paid to me had contracts, work involved, and concrete results. Whereas the funds Koa took didn't create goods, didn't generate profit, and didn't have the approval of authorized personnel. Koa didn't admit to being greedy. He blamed his father for always looking down on him, his sister for holding all the power, and me for never giving him a chance to prove his abilities. Since he was little, every time he failed, someone stepped in to clean up his mess. Therefore, even now, he still believes the cause lies with everyone else, just not with himself. Mai said slowly, no one ruined your life. You are the one using your failures to justify your greed. Just then, Tung walked in. Koa had likely secretly messaged him to come. Tung didn't get angry or deny the numbers on the table. He pulled up a chair and explained, this is just a cash flow transfer between affiliates. The documentation isn't finished because the company expanded too fast. He suggested that Mai sign an internal memo, confirming the entire amount as market development costs awaiting additional invoices. If your signature is on these, the transactions will be legitimized as executive decisions rather than personal acts. Mai refuses. Tung changes his attitude immediately. The softness on his face vanishes, replaced by a cold and slow voice. He reminds Mai that most payment orders bear her signature, and if this becomes a scandal, she cannot consider herself an outsider. What he says is not entirely wrong. Mai had signed many documents without checking them thoroughly, had concealed a shipment of equipment lacking paperwork, and had prioritized progress over safety. Could she claim she took no money? But her irresponsibility created the conditions for the wrongdoing to persist. Mai does not deny it. She says if she signed wrongly, she will bear her share of the responsibility, but she will not sign further papers to turn embezzled funds into legal expenses, nor will she let others take the fall for her. Tung stares at her for a long time, then stands up. Before leaving the room, he only says one sentence. Do you think bringing everything to light will make you clean? Mai does not respond. She realizes from that moment on, Tung has viewed her as an obstacle. Right after that, he pulls Koa into an empty room, demanding he transfer the remaining money from the intermediary company account to his personal one and then leave town for a few days. Tung says if they delay any longer, Mrs. Van or Mr. Tone will wake up and lock all transaction rights. Koa needs the verification code from the phone Mrs. Van is holding. He goes to his mother's recovery room at the hospital, saying he needs to borrow her phone to handle an urgent contract. Mrs. Van trusts her son and hands him the phone without asking, but when the bank notification pops up, she sees the recipient is a total stranger, and the amount is much larger than a standard payment. She grabs the phone back and demands an explanation from her son. Koa panics and says this is payment for a supplier, and if it isn't transferred immediately, the company will be sued. Mrs. Van asks why company money is being transferred to a personal account. Pushed into a corner, Koa suddenly lashes out. He shouts that his mother once said the entire legacy would eventually belong to him, so what is wrong with him taking a portion in advance? Do you really want to see your son behind bars to be satisfied? That statement left Mrs. Van speechless. For years, she had considered giving everything to her son as a sign of love. She had never thought that such favoritism led Koa to believe he had the right to take anything, including company money, others, hard work, and the workers' safety. That evening, Mrs. Van called me. Her voice was no longer as cold and sharp as the day she threw the bag at my feet. She asked if the things I was holding related to Koa meant her son had gone too far. I didn't list all the evidence, nor did I use that opportunity to tear her down. I only said that Koa still had one way left to mitigate the consequences. Stop the transfers, stop shredding files, and proactively hand over what he knew. She asked why, after everything her family had done, I was still showing her how to keep Koa from making a bigger mistake. I replied, I'm not saving him from responsibility. I just don't want someone who has already erred to keep going until there's no turning back." That night, Mrs. Van proactively asked the bank to lock access to accounts requiring verification codes from her phone. She handed her phone to Mai to keep and also retrieved the company seal from Koa's room. When Koa angrily asked if she still considered him her son, she looked at him for a long time and said, "I loved you, so I protected you for too long. From today on, I will not help you hurt anyone else." For the first time in years, Mrs. Van did not stand in front of her son to shield him from the consequences. She stepped aside, forcing Koa to look straight at the path he had chosen himself. Mrs. Van's blocking of transaction rights caused Tung's plan to withdraw the remaining funds to be halted immediately. From that night on, he never appeared at the company again. His phone was turned off, his rented apartment was locked, and the car he often used had also been returned to the rental agency beforehand. The next morning, Koa received a short message from an unknown number. Tung insisted that all payments were signed by Koa and Mai, while he only acted as an intermediary to introduce partners. He told Koa to handle his own part, never once mentioning he would return or share responsibility as he had promised. Koa called repeatedly, but the phone number was no longer reachable. He went to Tung's place, only to find a few cheap items left behind. The expensive clothes, personal computer, and all important documents had vanished. Only then did Koa realize his cousin, who always called him a partner, had actually been preparing an escape route for a long time. Tung used Koa to sign papers, used Mai to legitimize expenses, and used my name to shoulder the technical liability. When everything fell apart, he simply had to abandon those still named on the documents. In a state of panic, Koa went home to pack his clothes, intending to drive away. He said he just needed to stay away for a few weeks, wait for things to calm down, and then find a way to resolve it. But as the car reached the gate, Mrs. Van stood in front of the vehicle to block it. She was no longer crying or making excuses for him as she had in the past. She only asked where her son intended to go when his father was hospitalized. Workers were undergoing treatment, and billions from the company remained unaccounted for. Koa said he needed time to think, but she understood that was just another way of saying he was running away. She looked straight at him and said, "If you leave now, it isn't just a mistake anymore. People will see it as you hiding." Koa slammed his hands on the steering wheel, blaming his mother for freezing his accounts and cornering him. He asked if anyone could guarantee he wouldn't be held responsible if he stayed. Mrs. Van would not speak for the law, nor did she promise to use her connections to save him as before. Mai stepped out of the house, asking her brother to turn off the engine, get out, and come inside to talk. She admitted that she, too, had signed incorrectly and hidden things that should not have been hidden. But if the family continued to run from the truth, the first ones to suffer would still be the workers and their father on his hospital bed. Koa asked if turning himself in would lead to forgiveness, but Mai made it very clear that no one could promise that. Being forthcoming, handing over records, and addressing damages can only help authorities consider his attitude, not erase the wrongdoing as if it never happened. That night, Koa did not leave the house. He sat alone in the living room until nearly dawn, with no Tung standing by his side to tell him what to say. Koa was forced to look back on what he had done through his own thoughts. Once a business failure, his mother used company money to pay off his debts and placed him directly into a management position. Instead of seeing it as a chance to start over, Koa felt entitled to take even more. He took kickbacks from suppliers, used company funds to pay off old debts, bought his girlfriend a car, and then worked with Tung to falsify records to hide it. The next morning, Koa took the initiative to hand Mai his personal computer, 2 phones and a list of accounts he had used, containing all conversations with Tung, images of intermediary invoices, and messages requesting transfers after hours. Koa admitted to authorizing the import of supplies of unknown origin because he received a cut of the difference. After the accident, he personally ordered the valve assembly removed, components moved from the warehouse, and the report altered to shift responsibility to the technical department. Tung was the one who suggested using forms with my actual signature to create new acceptance records. Koa also testified that he used company money to pay off his phone shop debts and secretly invested in an intermediary transport business. Invoices were issued for non-existent shipments to withdraw money, which was then split between him and Tung. Regarding Mr. Tone collapsing in his office, Koa insisted he did not put anything into the tea. He only brought the tea in as usual and then left. When he was told by Tung that his father had collapsed, Hua panicked and followed his instructions, taking Mr. Tone's phone to delete several messages related to the cash flow investigation. That statement does not make Koa an innocent man. Even if he did not cause the heart attack, he still deliberately hid documents while his father was in critical condition. However, it does help the incident be viewed in its true nature, preventing a pre-existing medical condition from being turned into an unfounded poisoning story. The hospital and the family reviewed the medications and items Mr. Tone used that day. There were no clear signs indicating he had been affected by any strange substance. The doctor maintained that the main cause was a heart attack due to hypertension, combined with prolonged stress and insomnia. During that time, my father's health in Saigon had gradually stabilized. He no longer needed constant oxygen and could sit up on his own. Knowing the work in the north had reached a point requiring my direct intervention, Uncle Tu and a few relatives took the initiative to take turns caring for him. Before the day I left, my father asked me to sit by his bed. He did not ask how much money I would recover or how the other family would apologize. He only told me that going back was not about winning or losing against my wife's family. I was going back for my honor and for those being implicated. I returned to the north on a cloudy morning. I did not go to the house behind the factory, nor did I step into the company first. The first place I went to was the hospital to visit Mr. Tone. He was more alert, but his body was still very weak. When he saw me, his eyes turned red. He held my hand and said in broken sentences that the family had kept me there for 12 years. But when my biological father was in the emergency room, they pushed me out with a torn bag. I did not blame him. I said the most important thing now is his recovery, while company matters must be resolved with clear records and accountability. No one should continue to use family ties to cover up wrongdoing, but anger should not turn into revenge either. After consulting with my lawyer, I handed over copies of data, recordings, images, and my statement to the authorities. The valve Mr. Sao kept was also sent for inspection according to proper procedures. I did not post any videos online, nor did I use the evidence to force the family to split assets. Initial test results confirmed the valve was used, had its label replaced, and did not meet system operating specifications. The accounting data and messages Koa submitted also matched what was stored in Mr. Tone's box. Tung was discovered while attempting to withdraw funds from an intermediary account in another locality. His act of fleeing his residence, changing his phone number, and continuing to move money made his situation even worse. The man who was once confident he didn't sign documents directly, ultimately left too many traces while operating and benefiting. Koa was not exempted from responsibility, but because he confessed, his family sold the car registered to his girlfriend, recovered some assets, and used that money to remedy the damages. Before the day he officially worked with the authorities, Ms. Van prepared a lawyer for her son to protect his legal rights, but did not look for anyone to bribe or pull strings. She told Koa, "Mom can stand by you while you face the consequences, but I cannot turn what you did into innocence." Koa bowed his head for a long time, then turned to apologize to me. He said he was wrong, and hoped I would consider our family ties to help reduce his sentence. I did not scold him, nor did I promise anything beyond my ability. I only told him to fix what he could, and bear the part he must face himself. That is how an adult pays off the debt they have caused. Tung is the one facing heavier consequences for his role in organizing, setting up intermediary units, directing the falsification of records, and trying to cover his tracks after the accident. As for Koa, although he was considered for voluntarily submitting documents and partially remedying the harm, he still cannot avoid commensurate responsibility. In the end, I did not need to take revenge on anyone. It was greed that brought Tung and Koa down, and the betrayal between them caused their lies to be exposed one by one. The two once thought they could use family ties and power as a shield, but when interests ended, what they called brotherhood vanished faster than any contract. After the data in the box was cross-referenced with worker testimonies, duty logs, and component inspection results, responsibility for the accident was clearly defined. The documents bearing my name were no longer considered as reliable as they once were. Although the signature is authentic, the content above it was altered or attached to forms I had never read. The work schedule and driver logs prove that at many times recorded in the report, I was actually at another facility. In particular, the video of Koa and Tung removing components from the scene after the accident matches what Mr. Sao and several workers witnessed. The truth no longer depends solely on my own account. Tonton Company was forced to withdraw the internal report that once held the technical department responsible. On behalf of the executive board, I signed a correction notice confirming there was no basis to claim I caused the accident, embezzled assets, or fled the company. That content was sent to employees, partners, and the insurance unit that received the initial file. Mr. Sao suggested posting the notice right on the bulletin board where the old conclusion had been displayed. He said a person's honor, once lowered in front of many, should be restored in front of those same people. I agreed but requested that the notice only state the facts, without using offensive language toward Koa or anyone else being held accountable. I told Mr. Sao that exonerating the innocent does not mean humiliating those in the wrong. My primary concern was not returning to my old position, but the rights of the 3 injured workers. After a review, the company agreed to cover all medical expenses, salary during leave, and health recovery support. Lam's family is no longer being asked to sign confirmations containing false information. Lam still cannot move his arm as flexibly as before. He needs many more months of physical therapy, and it is unclear if he can continue working in a cold environment. When I visited, his mother held my hand to thank me, saying, "If you had stayed silent like the others that day, my family might have been in debt for life, never knowing why my son met with an accident. I do not take that gratitude for myself alone." I said if it weren't for Mr. Sao guarding the valve, the workers daring to tell the truth, and Ms. Wah backing up the accounting data, it would have been hard for me to do anything alone. In the end, it was the kindness of ordinary people that kept the truth from being erased by those in power. With the company lacking a safety officer, Mai and Mr. Tone asked me to return and oversee the entire technical system. Mr. Tone even wanted to draft a document granting me a share of the profits, as compensation for the years of dedication that went unrecognized. I did not accept returning to my old position. I agreed to help inspect the entire cold storage facility for a short period, but only as an independent expert. Every task must have a clear contract, specific scope of responsibility, and the right to stop operations immediately if safety risks are found. I did not return to the small house behind the workshop. During my days working in the north, I rented a room near the hospital to easily visit Mr. Tone and maintain a necessary distance from the family. 12 years of living together had blurred all boundaries between affection, work, and obligation. This time, I wanted everything to be put back in its proper place. One afternoon, Mrs. Van came to find me where I was staying. She brought along the torn bag, which had been washed and had its zipper repaired. The scuffs on the bag remained, but the straps had been carefully replaced. She placed the bag on the table, sitting for a long time without knowing how to begin. The woman who had once thrown it at my feet in the yard that day no longer held that cold expression. She said she didn't dare ask me to return home, she just wanted to return that item in a more decent way. I looked at the bag and said that what hurt me wasn't the old item itself. After 12 years of calling her mother, I was kicked out just when my biological father was in the emergency room, and everything I had ever done for the family was erased in a single sentence. Mrs. Van bowed her head, admitting she used to think that whoever had the money, the land, and the company name was the one who made the decisions. In her eyes, my long-term patience had become a sign of weakness. She believed I needed her home more than she needed me, so no matter how harsh her words were, I would ultimately stay. I didn't scold her, nor did I say I had forgiven her. I only said that an apology might help someone realize their mistake, but it is not a key that forces the hurt person to return to life as if nothing happened. Mrs. Van nodded. For the first time, she didn't use tears or her age to pressure me into softening. She just left the bag there and quietly walked away. The person I found hardest to face was still Mai. After providing the accounting data and admitting her responsibility, she voluntarily stepped down from her direct management role while the company was under review. She wasn't seen as having benefited from the funds, but the unchecked signatures and concealing materials without proper records were still undeniable mistakes. Mai met me at a small shop near the hospital. She had visibly lost weight, her face lacking the confidence from the days she sat in boardrooms. She admitted that for years she had relied on her husband's ability while feeling annoyed that people always asked for my opinion on important matters. She wanted to prove that she could manage on her own. So when Tung offered options that were fast and cheap, she intentionally ignored the warnings. What hurt me more was that Mai admitted she used to feel ashamed standing next to a husband in protective gear, while the partners around us were elegantly dressed and talking about grand things. I asked her one question: if this accident hadn't happened, would you ever have realized those things? Mai was silent. This silence no longer made me angry, because both of us knew the answer. Perhaps if everything had continued to bring in profit, she would have kept believing her choices were right. and I would still be the overly sensitive husband who couldn't fit in. Mai asked me to give our marriage another chance, not just for Mai, but for the early years when the two of us truly loved each other. I didn't refuse immediately, but I couldn't just agree simply because she felt regret. I suggested that we live apart for a while. Issues regarding our daughter must be resolved with mutual respect. We did not use Mai to pressure or punish each other. Mai continued to care for our child during her studies. I, meanwhile, proactively called to pick her up during breaks and participated in important decisions. When Mai asked why I didn't come home, I didn't tell her adult stories that would make her resent her mother or grandparents. I simply said Mom and Dad were relearning how to respect each other, and it wasn't her fault. In the following months, Mai attended marriage counseling and retaught herself business management. She no longer avoided responsibility, nor did she use family as an excuse to cover up wrongdoing. I saw that change, but at the same time, I realized the trust between us had been damaged too deeply. Quote, I can acknowledge Mai's efforts, I can continue to be a good parent to Mai with her, but I cannot force myself back into the marriage just because she now knows she was wrong. After many conversations, we agreed to divorce amicably, not fighting over our child and not using assets as a tool for retaliation. I only accepted the portion of shared assets truly formed during the marriage, according to a clear agreement. I refused the shares Mr. Tone wanted to give me out of sentimentality, because for 12 years, those benefits were never legally recognized. I told him, if you want to acknowledge my contributions, pay the outstanding amounts correctly and use the rest to ensure worker safety. I don't want to turn my 12 years into a business transaction. The day I left the North this time, I no longer held my bag with the feeling of being kicked out of the house. I carried it as a reminder that kindness needs boundaries. And family bonds, without respect, are just a constraint even when living under the same roof. My honor has been restored, but more importantly, I am beginning to learn how to reclaim my own life. After completing the final procedures in the North, I returned to Saigon to live with my father in our small house in the old alley. The house isn't large, and the furniture isn't worth much. But every morning when I wake up, hearing my father cough in the front room and the kettle whistling in the kitchen, I feel much more at peace. My father's health hasn't fully recovered. He still needs to take medication regularly, avoid heavy lifting, and attend follow-up appointments. On days when the weather changes and he struggles to breathe, I have to sit by his side, rubbing his back, and only go to sleep once his breathing stabilizes. For 12 years in the North, I sent money home regularly, called to check in, and always believed that was fulfilling my duty. Only when I personally took him to the doctor, organized his pills, and listened to his small stories about the neighbors did I realize that the elderly often don't need their children to send a lot of money. What they want most is for a loved one to be there when they are ill, so the house doesn't feel so empty and quiet. My father never blamed me for being away. He even said that without those years in the North, I wouldn't have become as mature as I am now. However, sometimes seeing him sitting alone on the porch, I still feel regret for spending so many years building a career that wasn't mine, while my only family was silently growing older every day. After my father's condition stabilized, I started looking for work again. I didn't apply to any big companies, nor did I want to keep living a life where all my achievements depended on someone else's decisions. I used my savings and the remaining legal severance pay to rent a small space and open an industrial refrigeration maintenance workshop. The early days were very difficult. My old clients were mostly in the North, while in Saigon, I had to build my reputation from scratch. The workshop only had a few toolkits, a used small truck, and 3 young workers working with me. I set a simple rule. New parts must be labeled as new, used goods must be described accurately, and if equipment doesn't need replacing, we must never scare the customer just to make extra money. I once witnessed a valve of unknown origin nearly claim the lives of 3 workers, so I could no longer treat negligence as a minor issue. There were months when rent, salaries, and machinery costs almost swallowed up all our revenue. Once, a young technician installed a sensor incorrectly, causing the client's system to operate unstably. Even though the incident hadn't caused major damage, I took responsibility, repaired it for free, and paid for the affected goods. Many people say that being too honest in business makes it hard to get rich. I don't know if I'll ever be rich, but I understand the feeling of others using paperwork to turn right into wrong. I don't want any customer or technician working with me to have to go through that feeling. That very approach of being transparent gradually helped the workshop gain more credibility. One customer referred another. People come to me not because I tell them I used to manage a system for a large company, but because I dare to say what needs replacing, what is still usable, and exactly how much it costs from the start. Lamb had recovered quite a bit after treatment, but his hands were no longer as flexible as before. He could no longer work long hours in cold environments and was also terrified of the sound of gas leaks whenever he stepped into the machine room. When he heard I had opened a workshop, Lamb called to ask for any job at all, as long as he didn't have to rely on his family. I invited him to take charge of checking the origin of materials, recording safety logs, and tracking maintenance schedules. At first, Lamb was worried because he lacked experience. I told him someone who almost lost their life because of equipment of unknown origin would understand the value of careful inspection better than anyone. Many people have degrees but worked carelessly. Lamb learned very quickly. For every shipment, he would check every serial number, photograph the condition, and ask the deliverer to sign for confirmation. Watching him work diligently, I felt that part of the painful consequences from the past had finally been turned into something useful for others. Mr. Sao still lives up north. After the Tonton Company reorganized, he took early retirement to be near his family. Sometimes he calls to talk with my young technicians, showing them how to listen to machine sounds, how to detect abnormal pipe vibrations, and sharing experiences not found in textbooks. Tonton Company was forced to downsize and sell off assets to pay compensation, settle debts, and address the aftermath. After his recovery, Mr. Tone stepped back from direct management. He hired professional managers, separated finance from technical operations, and stopped family members from making decisions beyond their expertise as before. Mai continued to stay in the north to take care of Mai and support her father in stabilizing the company. She no longer held full signing authority over finances. All major decisions had to go through an independent control department. After the divorce, we didn't speak much to each other beyond matters concerning our child. But Mai kept her word, never preventing me from seeing Mai or using the child to cast blame. Every vacation, she would come to Saigon to stay with me and her grandfather. Mai was initially very sad that her parents no longer lived together. Once, she asked if the family would still be the same if grandma hadn't kicked dad out. I didn't want a child to carry the bitterness of adults, so I just said some things don't start in a single day and can't be fixed by one apology. The important thing is that mom and dad still love you and will never force you to take sides. Mrs. Van once visited Saigon to see her granddaughter. She took the initiative to go to my father's house to apologize. The woman who once looked down on our small house and an electrician's hand sat for a long time on the old wooden chair, her voice devoid of its former arrogance. She said that before, she only saw that my son had no land and no wealthy family to back him up. When everything happened, she realized the person who kept the company afloat through difficult years was the one she always thought was living off her family. My father didn't preach, he just said everyone makes mistakes sometimes. But from now on, don't force someone to sacrifice forever just to prove they deserve to be considered family. Mrs. Van bowed her head, offering no further justification. Koa had to be held accountable before the law and use his remaining assets to partially compensate for the damages. After fulfilling the necessary obligations, he was not allowed to return to a management position at Tonton. He started in an ordinary job elsewhere, with no fancy car or title to rely on anymore. Once, Koa called me to say that in the past, he always hated me because everyone kept comparing my abilities to his. Only when he lost everything did he realize no one had ever stolen his place. It was his own impatience, greed, and the habit of having others pave his way that made him destroy his final opportunity. I didn't bring up the past. I just told him that if he truly wanted a fresh start, he should begin with small tasks, earn his own honest wages, and stop demanding respect just because of who his parents are. Tung faced graver consequences for orchestrating the intermediary transactions, forging documents, and attempting a cover-up after the accident. Those who once called him a business partner turned their backs one by one when there were no more benefits to gain. In the end, the person who always believed money and connections could get him out of anything was abandoned by the very relationships built on exploitation. One year-end afternoon, while cleaning the warehouse, I saw the torn bag that Mrs. Van had mended. I didn't throw it away. I use it to hold my protective gear and a few personal tools whenever I have to travel to distant construction sites. A young worker once asked why I still use such an old bag even though I am the boss. I just smiled and said, "It reminds me that some things may look worn on the outside but still hold value, as long as one knows how to preserve what is inside." After everything, I no longer think of whether I won or my in-laws lost. I only see that everyone has received the results of their own choices. Those who know when to stop still have a chance to make amends. Those who continue to use greed to cover up their mistakes must eventually walk a path alone with no one left by their side. As for me, after 12 years as a son-in-law in a foreign land, I have finally returned to the very home where I grew up. I didn't bring back a great fortune, nor do I hold in my hands the things that were once promised. But I still have my father, my daughter, my trade, and enough peace of mind to start over. Sometimes leaving a home where there is no longer any respect does not mean being heartless. It is simply the moment one learns how to care for others without continuing to neglect oneself.